Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelo, the founder of the Transparency Task Force. Thank you very much indeed for wanting to watch this video. But just before it starts, here's a short but important message. It really does take a lot of time and money to produce our events, the videos, and all the campaigning work that we do. So if you're not already a subscription member, please do become one. That's really important. You'll find all the details you need through the link that you can see on the screen now. And if for any reason you're unable to become a subscription member, please at least make a donation. You'll see the link for our donations page coming up on the screen now. And just in case you need them, the links to both of those pages are in the video description. Thank you very much. Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelo. I'm the founder of the Transparency Task Force, which is a certified social enterprise. Our purpose is to reform the way the financial services sector works. We believe that the financial industry is profoundly important to the well-being of society, to economic stability, and to political stability as well. I've said on many occasions in recent months that when I first started the Transparency Task Force, I was very much of the view that the UK's Financial Conduct Authority is very much a part of the solution. However, over the years, I've come round to believing that the FCA is actually a great big part of the problem. And the topic that we are going to be discussing today, interest rate hedging products, mis-selling, and what can be done, will, I hope, provide even further evidence suggesting that we are experiencing ongoing, almost routine, chronic, catastrophic regulatory failure. And that's clearly a massive concern, given how important the financial sector is to the UK, and of course, given how many thousands of people are being harmed as a consequence of malpractice, malfeasance, misconduct, and mis-selling by banks and various other financial institutions. Tonight's session will be structured rather differently to normal. We haven't prepared a sort of set number of speakers to one person to talk after another. Rather than that, what I'm going to be doing is drawing people in to respond to particular points and build the narrative as we go. But as you'll realize, this is going to be very much an action-orientated event, because there are things we want to happen as a direct consequence of the conversations we're having today. So please expect to be drawn into the topics as we go. In a moment, I'm going to be asking Paul Carlier, then Steve Middleton, to talk about the December the 14th deadline, just specifically responding to what is the December 14th deadline all about, and just focusing on that, because we're going to be taking our attendees through a bit of a journey. So, Mr. Paul Carlier, could you please introduce yourself first of all, and just in your plain words, plain English, as succinctly as you can, as succinctly as you can, explain what the December 14th deadline is all about. Just so everybody understands that bit first of all, and then I'll be putting the same question to Steve just to kind of get his take on it as well. Thanks, Paul. Thank you very much.
Okay, so essentially, the Swift investigation report does much more than just provide some damning conclusions, and that are the subject of the judicial review. It's also as much about what was not in the report as that which was, which in turn begs questions as to the independent investigation and to what extent it might have been compromised or prejudiced. And the importance of that is that it brings all of these matters that were, and all of these conclusions and all of these issues under the banner of the Swift report and the independent investigation, which means as long as you get a complaint in within 12 months of the Swift report being published, your complaint is eligible for the FCA complaint scheme. So, and it brings all of these matters within that remit and makes it impossible for the FCA to refuse to address them. And that's where I'm sure we will come over as we go. And it also means as well, if more people put their complaints in, the FCA cannot dismiss it on the, we don't get involved in individual cases. That's another important thing. So we have 12 months from the date of the report to get a complaint in, and regarding any of the issues specific or covered by the report. And then, by more people putting complaints in, the FCA cannot dismiss them on that they're an individual case, and therefore they don't have to deal with them. So that's the premise. That's the broad premise.
Perfect. Thank you very much indeed, Paul. That was perfect. We're going to go to Steve Middleton. After Steve, I'm going to ask Stephen Barker for his comments about, what is the December 14th deadline all about? Because I just want everybody to understand the significance of that. And then Andy Candy might want to add a few comments as well. Okay, so Steve Middleton, please introduce yourself first of all. Paul, next time you speak, please introduce yourself. I forgot to ask you to do that, my fault. Steve Middleton, introduce yourself and explain in your words why the December the 14th deadline matters. And then we'll go to Stephen Barker, then to Andy Candy. Thanks, Mr. Middleton.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, Steve Middleton. I think quite a few of you know me, but I'm a financial advisor, ex-banker, and work as an advisor, a consultant on regulatory matters, largely to do with swaps, mortgages, and other areas presently. The complaint to the FCA is not a way of getting redress or compensation, unfortunately, because that's kind of not the way it works for the FCA. The importance of it is that many people who should have got redress and compensation through the Irhp didn't get that because of the way the review was set up. And you only have, if you're aware of an issue with the FCA or a problem with the FCA, you only have 1 year in which to raise that issue before you're no longer able to bring a complaint. So the important point was that the Swift review itself, whereas many people are focused on the sophisticated client category, and rightly so, because that was the best part of 10,000 claims that were not dealt with. There are other key issues, such as the thing we've just been talking about with Sir Stephen Timms, which is the margin credit, the non-disclosure of margin credit, and the damage that did, which is not dealt with by the Swift review. He actually gets it completely wrong. There's the fact that the review itself did not work to the rules, and Andrew Candy put an interesting quote up the other day, I think, from Swift, where he was saying, well, if that sales standard didn't comply with the rules or they got this wrong, surely they'd recognise that. That wasn't the case. The skilled persons and the independent reviewers were trained to work to the sales standards put forward in the review, not to the rules. So people literally lost their statutory rights to compensation because of the way the review was drafted. And there are some people who were left entirely out of the review. Certainly some people with fixed rate loans were affected by this. This is a chance to really point out all of the substantial flaws in the actual review process itself, but the substantial flaws and failures for these to be addressed by the Swift report itself. So that's why it's important we get as many complaints in as possible, and with as many personal details and stories as possible, because as Paul rightly says, it makes it then just not an individual thing they can run away from. It becomes a mass problem that they've got to deal with.
Steve Middleton, that was perfect. Thank you very, very much indeed. Let's go to Stephen Barker. Stephen, please introduce yourself. Tell us about why you have, why this is even relevant to you. Let people understand a little bit about your own situation, if you're happy to do that, and then give your comments about why the December the 14th deadline matters. Thanks, Stephen.
Yes, I was a person that was sold an interest rate hedging product, a derivative and a swap, all of which is discussed in the letter. I had no idea about the mechanics of the workings of such an instrument. I was reassured by the bank of its efficacy for our purposes and the protections that it gave. But the reality was, of course, that it was a very expensive and prejudicial instrument to be sold in our circumstances. This led to further complications in dealing with the bank, and it's only really become much more clearer to me since I've been involved with the TTF, and I'm grateful to the TTF for gathering together people who know a lot more about these instruments than I do. The 14th of December deadline, well, it depends what route you're taking to launch some kind of fighting back strategy, if I can call it that. But it is an opportunity to do all the things that Paul and Steve have just outlined, and that's not harmful, quite the opposite. It's an opportunity. It would be harmful to just ignore it. What the outcome of that might be is impossible to predict. The reality is that the FCA will do its best, I'm sure, to, as it has done all along in this story, avoid liability, avoid responsibility, and avoid any duties that are clearly set out in the statute. So I've made a modest contribution to the template, which Andy has edited and structured for us. And I think there are issues for the FCA. They are exposed, and not because of the December 14th deadline, but more generally, it is, though, having the ability to effectively bring that to the public's awareness, in particular MPs' awareness, and the FCA board. I am reminded that it was the FCA's non-executive directors who called for the review. I would say, having been on a number of boards of directors, for non-executive directors to be concerned about the conduct of the organisation, to call for some kind of a review by, in quotes, an independent person, suggests they're not entirely comfortable about the current situation. So the opportunity here is to make it very clear to those directors, you were absolutely right to call for that review, but unfortunately that review, for the reasons we set out, was not conducted in a way that fully explained the situation to you, but you were right to do it. So the 14th is important to make sure that the executive directors don't avoid having to report the public response, which I think would be the case if nobody responded. They'd say everything's okay, and it's not. Okay.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. Well, we're going to go to Andy Candy for his comments about the significance about the 14th of December deadline. And then Abhishek, if you're happy to say a few words around that as well, please. We're just focusing on the importance of the deadline. First of all, we're going to have time to talk about many of the other issues in due course. Andy Candy, please introduce yourself and share your thoughts about the importance of the deadline. Thank you.
Hi, yes, my name's Andrew Candy. I previously ran a design and sort of gallery for cooperative artists. Company was sort of pretty much totally destroyed by a swap sold to me in 2008 by my bank HSBC. And then subsequently, once discovering that had been done, then being embroiled in an extensively long campaign to get justice and compensation, starting in 2009 and still continuing some, well, over a decade later. I think many of us that went through the review process, many were obviously excluded, but those of us that persevered and went through and did or didn't receive some sort of result through that process, also registered complaints about the failure of the scheme, the appalling manner in which it was run, designed, operated, abused by the banks, not supervised by the FCA, and complaints were issued during that period of time but all very conveniently in the last couple of months following Swift's report have all appeared to have been sort of thrown into touch or kicked into the long grass by resolution one way or another. So effectively, the FCA appear to be clearing the playing field of any complaints against them in relation to the scheme that arose during the process. And obviously this process now gives us the last opportunity, really, with criticism of Swift's review and the review itself, to get that registered and logged and make sure that the FCA have to deal with it, and that they have to deal with it publicly and properly. Because as we've been seeing, as has been, I think, quite starkly highlighted by the efforts of people like Steve Middleton and Paul Carlier and many others, to really highlight the conspiracy between the banks and the FCA to perpetrate fraud against us on a quite massive scale. And the deadline in December is the last opportunity to really get these factors onto the charge sheet and properly addressed, not least because obviously the recent involvement of swaps and margin calls on pension schemes has highlighted what happens when the regulator is allowed to get away with assisting the banks in getting away with and covering up fraud, because clearly they were going and perpetrating this, as far as I'm personally concerned, on the pension companies as well. And an out of control regulator shows scant regard for moral issues, let alone technical regulatory issues, in my opinion, is extremely dangerous for the UK economy, especially given what's going on at the moment. So I think it's absolutely essential that this is put on the record and publicised as widely as possible to really get this finally dealt with after 12 years or more.
Andy, thank you so much. Your very good point about the moral dimension to this is something we're going to be returning to quite shortly. We're going to hear from Abhishek. Abhishek may have some thoughts, and then we're going to go to Ian Lightbody. So Abhishek next, then Ian Lightbody. Again, folks, just focus on the why does the December the 14th deadline matter first of all, because we'll be opening up to other topics in due course. Abhishek, what would you like to say?
Thank you, Andy. So my name is Abhishek. I run Vedanta Hedging Limited. We're FCA regulated to advise on derivatives, including to retail clients. In other words, kind of small businesses. So my kind of background and context on this is that, you know, we were one of the people who I believe helped to instigate this Irhp review in the first instance, back in sort of 2011 and 12. And in fact, we got paid by the FCA early on to advise them on some of the basics of how these derivatives work, et cetera, et cetera. The reason why this December 14th deadline, I think, is so interesting and almost can't be overstated in importance is because, again, if you look at the minutes, what they actually say, they're effectively, for the first time, in my opinion anyway, actually opening the door to allow individual complaints to be looked at by the FCA. Because other than that, I and other lawyers and other people around this group here will have seen umpteen times the FCA saying we do not get involved in individual complaints, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Here, they're basically saying that in response to some of the things that the Swift report has said, that they are willing to look at each of the complaints. Now, yes, of course, as you'd expect, the FCA caveats it by saying they're not really expecting to pay much or anything, et cetera, et cetera. But this is a leap from where the FCA has been in the past. Now, we can all criticize all the stuff that happened in the Swift report, and the Swift report itself is a criticism of the FCA, et cetera, et cetera. And many of us around this group have been saying these things to the FCA since 2013, let alone right now in 2022. So this is absolutely critical, because let's not forget there is a small but hardcore rump of small businesses who have still not received anywhere near the level of compensation they should have got, and some never ever will. And that's because I've got clients, and I'm sure some other people here will know too, who've actually committed suicide or have died because of the stress or shame of this. So this cannot be overestimated in terms of, for the first time, the regulator saying it's willing to look at these complaints.
Thank you very much indeed. That's a really powerful testimony from Abhishek there. Mr. Ian Lightbody, please introduce yourself and share your thoughts about why the 14th of December deadline matters so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. firstly, I was coming on here just to observe tonight, so you've caught me a bit unawares, but I'll do my best to tell you where I fit in here. My situation, as many others, and see Gersh Samra's on here today, is I am a Clydesdale Bank victim, which is Clydesdale Bank are a bit of a maverick in relation to these. They think they're a big bank, and they behave like a big bank in some respects, the way they treat customers, but they're not really a big bank at all, and they're very much a failing bank. But the impact that they've had pro rata has been ridiculous, and they really have. And like Abhishek said, we've had suicides. One chap 14 miles away from me, a young farmer, set his tractor over himself in low gear and basically took his own life. With another chap, an IFA, believe it or not, you know, people, this issue is not indiscriminate. It basically, an IFA, his young daughter, in fact, Samir's on tonight. It was part of his documentary, his film, that the chap put the door up in his the chap's garage door went up. His daughter put the door up, and there he was. Her father was swinging from the rafters, you know. So there's another. So we've actually had 3 suicides in our group, which is horrendous. Anyway, I've been around this situation for a good few years nowadays. And I've found that I've garnered a lot of information that is contradictory, and it just puts the FCA and the FOS in a really bad light, and others. I believe this is Treasury led. I believe that this comes from Treasury. It started with Osborne and whoever else, John Glenn. And so my situation at the moment is that I'm in the process at the moment of working with my MP, Kirsten Oswald, who's the deputy leader of the SNP in Parliament. And she has managed to get a response from the FCA in relation to an individual complaint I had, which they refused to answer me, but have now answered her. They're not just answering her, they've actually given her a whole lot of misrepresentation, gross misrepresentations, which they've now given to me, and I'm now in the process of responding to them. And it's quite exciting at this time because they make reference to SWIFT. They send the SWIFT report, they send their reply, but they don't say that, 1, they didn't take his recommendations, and 2, the whole thing was a crock of SH1T. So that's the ongoing scenario there, which she's now in the process, I think, of trying to get a debate in Parliament, which is great. And I think we need to all get round this and really make this happen. In relation to the 14th of December letter, Clydesdale, interestingly, told us in documentary evidence is there that we were getting IRHPs. Never told us they didn't get an IRHP. And then, lo and behold, they now tell us that we got a simple fixed rate loan. And Steve Middleton knows this thing inside out, and that's why he just made a comment that, you know, they should be included, you know, as well. They all have all the, as Andrew Tyree in June 2014 at the Treasury Select Committee said to David Thorburn, who's the CEO of Clydesdale, you know, if it spurts water like an elephant, it's got a trunk like an elephant, and it walks like an elephant, invariably it's an elephant. And that's what these products were. So even though we write in, the FCA will probably write back and say you didn't have an IRHP, and that's what they've said to my MP. But we've got the documentary evidence to say it was an IRHP. So other things, for instance, that go on, and Abhishek will be interested in this, is Douglas Campbell, who was the head of the corporate support for the bank, goes to the Court of Session, the highest court in Scotland, and tells them that these non-IRHP basic fixed rate loans were mark-to-market products, and discusses the virtues of mark-to-market rate costs and all sorts. So the gross misrepresentations, all the misleading evidence that one audience is told one thing, another audience is told another thing. We're bringing all this together now, and somewhere, and I totally agree with Andy Candy here, you know, in that, you know, they think we're going away, and you might call us a small cohort. In fact, it was Abhishek, a rump. I think he said, I was told by Andrew Bailey we were a small cohort, which I took, you know, I said, we're not small. These are thousands and thousands of businesses, and this is a far bigger problem than PPI, and they haven't applied the same rules. So that is why I think I'm really heartened that we've got such a talented panel here tonight, and you're bringing such a talented panel of others in other areas, Andy, and this needs blowing up, and we're not going away.
Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you very much indeed. That sentiment of we are not going away is absolutely key to this whole thing. I'm going to share with you, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show you I'm going to show you a tweet, or a series of tweets actually, in relation to James Hurley. For those of you that don't know, James Hurley is he's a very well respected journalist, working for a major publication that we would all know. And James put out some tweets last year that I personally found fascinating. And I'm sharing these particular tweets with you for a reason. The reason being that it is because it would be quite rational for anybody listening to what we're discussing tonight to think that we are somehow, making this all up, or we are exaggerating it, okay? That we're talking as though we're, conspiracy theories, talking about collusion between the banks and the Treasury and all that kind of thing, right? So even if you don't believe us, journalists from major publications don't put stuff out on Twitter unless they can back it up, because everyone's getting sued these days for that kind of thing. So when James Hurley puts out a tweet, this is 14th of December 2021, what then FSA boss Martin Wheatley said in private about pressures from ministers to, quote, go easy on banks. So let's reframe that. He's talking about government ministers, okay, in private saying go easy on the banks by watering down a small business compensation scheme and what he told Parliament a month earlier. So there's a really, really powerful tweet there. And another one here. Important to note, FSA records suggest it felt it resisted this pressure. So the narrative is, and this, I can't help laughing. The narrative is, yes, we know there's evidence suggesting that the government and the banks pressurised the FCA, but heroically, the FSA, didn't succumb to any of that pressure whatsoever. Not a bit, not a dot. However, rather conveniently, the very things that they were being pressurised to do were the very things that they actually did. But of course, there's no connection between the two. The FSA didn't succumb to the pressure. They completely independently came to the very conclusions that the pressure was designed to get them to conclude. But the next bit, even sillier. It's hard to say this stuff and keep a straight face. Despite the fact that the FSA's decision to about turn and come to a conclusion that was going to water down the amount of compensation the banks had to pay, despite that being a massive decision, a really serious decision, there's not one sketch of one note on a fag packet or anywhere to explain why the FSA changed their minds. Right? You'd think I was making this up, folks, but that's actually what happened. Mr. Ian Lightbody wants to come in. Mr. Lightbody.
Andy, sorry, I should have said it earlier. It ties in exactly what you just said there. I don't know if anybody watched yesterday's FCA appearance at the Treasury Select Committee. I was actually, threw up, to be honest with you. And this ties in with one of the things that this report that I'm doing for my MP. Richard Lloyd, I have to say, I'm not a fan of Richard Lloyd. People going about John Glenn and Richard Lloyd, all nice guys and everybody else, they've done nothing for our cause. Richard Lloyd is the acting chair of the FCA. And in 2018, Richard Lloyd did a strategic review of the Financial Ombudsman Service. And he told Kevin Hollenrake at the time, and I know a lot of people on this call don't particularly rate Kevin Hollenrake. Kevin Hollenrake told me personally at the time that Richard Lloyd appeared at his office and told him at the time, and this is his customer champion, which magazine or whatever else, that he had the strategic review which he was well paid for doing for the Financial Ombudsman Service. He had to basically water it down because it affected the confidence in the Financial Ombudsman Service staff and whatever else. Anyway, as part of this report I'm doing for my MP, I contacted Kevin and said, "Hey, Kevin, I would never divulge this without your permission, but do I have your permission to say exactly what you told me in July 2018?" And he came back and said, no problem, go ahead. I didn't think watering down's exactly what I said, but here's what and it's basically, he gave me an alternative, but along the lines of he watered it down because it would have been, you know, too dramatic and whatever else. So he's the acting chair of the FCA. And this is going to come out now. And Kevin, let's say Kevin has consented for this to go on the record. It's going to be part of our parliamentary debate. So this is what we're up against. These, you know, we're not, and Abhishek knows, and Abhishek just put on the chat there. He knows firsthand what Sahid Javid did. Abhishek was there. So we need to get this, you know, that's what I'm saying about correlation of information. Somebody knows this, somebody knows that. Abhishek said this in a Zoom call once, and you know, whatever else. Bring it together and get it in front and make it so dynamic that this cannot go away. You know, we are not a cohort, a small cohort. We are actually in a very effective information gathering, you know, organisation, and we have, you know, the balls to get this done for thousands of other people. That's what we should do.
Ian, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm going to come back to the power of teamwork in a short while. This is one further bit from James Hurley. And by the way, there are various other journalists who've also been commenting around this. It just goes to show how powerful the narrative is that I can draw from on so much from just one journalist. So here's James Hurley. And why did FSA, FCA and Treasury all lie about this interference? Let's think about that sentence. He's not suggesting that they might have lied. He's not doing that at all. He's saying, why did FSA, FCA and Treasury all lie about this interference? That really could not be any stronger. I'll come to Paul Carey in just a second. Here he says, Swift concludes FSA managed to resist the Treasury pressure, brackets, despite coming up with a change that satisfied what that pressure was aiming to achieve. And as you've seen, I've been putting these notes into the chat for you to look at yourselves. Mr. Paul Carlier, your thoughts, please. Paul, just briefly introduce yourself.
So for those who don't know me, I was a foreign exchange trader for 25 plus years for several of the world's largest banks, and the last two of which I spent on the trading floor at Lloyd's, and was a whistleblower at UBS and Lloyd's, and since 2014 have been providing litigation support services and some pro bono expertise and support for victims that have been let down, or victims of banking or financial wrongdoing and let down by the ombudsman or regulator. On this point here, what Andy's just pointed out, James Hurley just summarises exactly what it was. Here's evidence that the FSA, FCA and HT all lied. It's not up for debate, it's all there. And yet no one's done anything. You know, it's a bit like you look at the post office scandal. Look at all that we now know. Who's doing it? It's almost like, well, all those responsible for oversight, unless somebody forces us to, or unless somebody, we're not going to do anything. You know, if I'm an MP, or if I'm in a position of oversight and I discover and I see something like that in the public domain, in the press, I'm going to ask a question. Say, hang on, what's being done about this? You know, surely regulators and those with responsibility for oversight, including police, surely they have to be taking responsibility for acting on this evidence that comes up in the public domain. But they don't. Basically, everyone's being forced to either hire expensive lawyers or do it themselves. Nobody is taking responsibility. And a lot of the times when they do take responsibility, it's only because you've bloody forced them into a position where they've got no choice but to take a position. And just on that note, if you look at Nikki Morgan, when she was chair of the Treasury Select Committee, everyone said, oh yeah, she did this and she did that. Look again during her tenure. When she did act and write to the FCA and Lloyd's about the Turnbull report, she only did it because all of us, the APPG had already exposed it, and so had Andy Verity, and she had no choice but to be seen to be doing it. There was no proactive take the nettle, write to them, right, we've heard about this Turnbull report, cough up and share it with us. You know, and this is going on throughout the entire hierarchy of oversight. James Hurley published that last year. What's happened? No, nothing. So this is why, again, we have to keep up this pressure, because if you've seen recently with Blackmore bond developments, Mark Stewart's gone. and he was clearly backed into a corner, and it's exposed a whole series of lies that, you know, that the FCA's made in the last 2 years on that, and that is going to have repercussions. And it's, you know, and, you know, there are law firms now taking that up. So you have to keep up the pressure, and whatever we can do as a group to do that is only going to reap rewards.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you very much. I'm going to share one more tweet. Of all of them, this I think is the most sort of telling. Again, it's James Hurley. The tweet says, sorry, I've got a screen here. It shows exclusive official review of swaps. This is the James, so the this John Swift KC review. The official review of swaps redress scheme includes evidence of Treasury interference intended to reduce banks' liability by billions of pounds at expense of small businesses who were victims of mis-selling. Again, if you really think about the clarity of those statements and the firmness of those statements, it really could not be any clearer than it is. In a moment, we're going to be hearing from each of our panelists again. I'm going to be putting a very, very simple question to them. I want everybody to understand the potential downside of missing that 14th of December deadline, okay? The potential downside of missing that December the 14th downside. So worst case scenario, Paul, let's say you were an interest rate hedging product victim and nobody told you about the 14th of December deadline. And as a consequence, you didn't know that you had until then to put a complaint in. What could potentially be the downside to you of missing that deadline, even if the reason you missed it is because you weren't aware that the deadline existed?
Right. Well, I mean, I've got a very similar situation where I can explain the consequences on a personal level. Basically, the complaint scheme, as whatever you think of it and however much you trust its integrity or honesty, it's free. And I cannot stress that enough. It's free. It's a right that you have. So, and whilst the FCA, you may not trust it, they cannot ignore it, and they are forced to address the issues that you raise, right? So, and that's part of the scheme now, and especially the more people that submit the complaints. And what it does, and with all of these things, you see banks, you see regulators, their stock answer is always, we don't have to share anything, we don't have to do. Well, this they're forced to respond to. And when you force people to put positions out and respond to things directly, it's where lies are exposed or admissions by them have to be made. Now, what I'm seeing on a regular basis is from Lloyd's, in my own personal ongoing issue with them, and also the FCA, they are seeking ways to exhaust these free processes, so to complete them or to find a way to exclude you from them, leaving you with no choice but to avail yourself of civil litigation at huge expense. And they don't mind saying it at the bottom as well. You know, they, for example, the FCA deemed a complaint of mine eligible that I made within the 12-month period in February this year. They assigned it to an investigator, and I had them by the balls for you know, not to put too fine a point on it. They knew that, and then 3 months later, as a result of that, when we've reconsidered, it's no longer eligible. If you want to take us on, do so at your own cost. So they found a way, and so they deprived me of that free process where I don't have to pay. They have to answer and address my complaints, and simply found a way to exclude me from it. Now I've got my MP involved, and we're looking at challenging that. But you know, this is why if you pass up an opportunity for a free process, you know, you are limiting your options, and you are literally allowing them to channel you into the thing. Okay, the only option you got is civil litigation, which we all know you're not going to get change out of 250 grand, if that. So it is so important. Get it in, and then put them in a position where, right, the ball's in your court. You've got to respond now. So.
Thank you, Paul. That's perfect. Thank you very much. We're going to go to Steve, then we're going to go to Andy Candy, then Stephen Barker for the same question. So, Steve Middleton, what's the potential cost to somebody if they were to miss the deadline, if they were for some reason to not hear about the deadline and not put a complaint in time? What could the downside be to them personally?
I think if an individual has a genuine complaint or has losses related to this, you draw a line in the sand, you put something on the record, yeah, because you don't know where things move forward from here. And if many of us got what we wanted, it would be some form of public inquiry into the FCA over these matters, or some kind of royal commission. But effectively, if you get something on the record now and you challenge them, they put an answer in writing, and that answer stays there in writing. And I found, and you've probably found this, Paul, and I'm sure Abhishek will have done. I mean, I've worked on some cases for as long as 5 or 6 years. And it's quite amazing that sometimes you can get a piece of evidence that, and you'll go back to something that you've got from 3 or 4 years ago and found that they've completely contradicted themselves and tied themselves up and can't go anywhere with it. So I think it's very important to get those formal answers on the record, because we know they're not being honest about a lot of these matters. Things like the margin credit, as we've said, that's been hugely covered up. They've got to come up with a reason, or they've got to come up with an explanation of whether they understand their own rules, and if they don't, why they're writing them in the first place, and why they're supposed to be trying to regulate them if they don't understand them. So I think that's the key thing for me. It's not necessarily what you get out of it now, it's what you might get out of it in the next few years.
Thank you, Steve. That's really, really interesting indeed. Thank you. Mr. Andy Candy, is there anything you'd like to add to what's been said? And then we'll go to Stephen Barker, then Abhishek, then Ian Lightbody. Andy, anything to add to this particular point?
Yeah, I'd just like to sort of say that, pretty much speaking, as a result of Treasury interference, which is a massive question in the first place as to what business they had doing that in the first place, irrespective of keeping markets secure and balanced and all that nonsense, which is quite frankly bull. But as a result of the FCA's gross misconduct, and in my opinion, criminal conduct, I'll make no bones about it, no one, I repeat, no one has got the redress that they were due from what the bank perpetrated on them and what the FCA has conspired to cover up for this decade or more. And more people are suffering, whether it be via pension schemes, whether it be via fixed rate loans or other things that the regulator has let slip, turned a blind eye to, actively assisted the banks in covering up. So not to put a complaint in, whether it be individually or group support or whatever, it's absolutely critical, excuse my French, that these bastards are held to account for the crimes they've committed. There are too many people across multiple scandals, mortgage prisoners, there's loads, CYBG, RBS, GRG, Lloyds. I mean, it's an endless liturgy of crimes by banks that go unanswered, and customers who expect a reasonable amount of protection are not getting that. And not only are they not getting it, they're getting absolutely screwed by the regulator in the process. And putting a complaint in draws a line in the sand, says no more, and says, we want the compensation, we want it now, and you need to pay for the crimes that you've committed.
Well said, sir. Crikey. Fantastic, Andy. Mr. Stephen Barker, anything that you'd like to add?
I think all the points made are absolutely spot on. Having things on the record in writing is something that they desperately try to avoid. Even in the bank's actions initially, in the interface between themselves and the customers, they wrote very little about the things that they actually said to customers, thus making it very difficult for customers at a later date to have the evidence to demonstrate what they believed was the circumstances that were being explained to them. That's a lesson learned. So this is an opportunity on a whole raft of issues to get something down in a proper process that is within their interpretation of the legislation, i.e. the complaints scheme. It's their scheme. It's just like the SWIFT report is their report, and the most useful evidence is when it comes from the perpetrator. In other words, what they do is the best evidence to demonstrate their errors and the mistakes or the deliberate actions. They're not the actions of the victim, they're the actions of the perpetrator. And you need to get that in a form that you can use effectively if you're able or need to get into court. The optimistic view is that eventually the facade will crack and somebody somewhere, probably at the Treasury, will say, this is massive. A lot of it's going to fall back on us, the Treasury, or could do. The Barlow Clowes episode in the 90s was an example of the failure of the Bank of England to supervise properly. And the government of the day had to set up a fund of compensation for people who had invested in Barlow Clowes. Not because, as a matter of law, it was more a question of the integrity of the Bank of England, and the government of the day was called into question. And I think the December 14th letter, we've tried to write that, all of us as a group, not for the specialist, but for your good selves, ordinary business people, because many of these SMEs were businesses, for ordinary MPs, so as they can follow the arguments and the technical bits without it being too technical, if you understand me. Because until we get to that level, people won't be willing to grasp the issues because they don't understand them. And I think that's been a failing for the last 10 years. They don't understand them. So, December the 14th, get something in. Doesn't matter what it is or your circumstances, get something in.
Stephen, thank you very much indeed. Abhishek, then Ian, as succinctly as you can. Abhishek, anything you'd like to add at this stage about the?
Just very quickly, I mean, I look, and there's a bit of chat going on this as well. I mean, about sort of, appetite in Westminster about this. I mean, look, I don't actually think I disagree with Stephen in terms of I don't think it's about trying to simplify this enough for MPs because. I myself, I mean, this is back in 13, 14, I must have been in Portcullis House every few days, literally writing questions and responses for these MPs. It doesn't matter how much we try to simplify things, the same sort of things that, Steve and Paul will probably be aware of in court proceeds. You can simplify things as much as possible, but the other side, i.e. the banks, will still deliberately complicate and obfuscate. So then we have to start coming up with complexity to try and match them at that level. Otherwise, you just find they get completely bamboozled and just come up with spurious arguments. But look, the question posed by Andy is this. What is the potential cost of not meeting this 14th deadline? I genuinely believe that this may well be the absolute final straw for some businesses. Just today, I was speaking to a lawyer about another potential case. Someone heard about 4 or 5 different cases. It's been going on for a few years in terms of their trustee issues and bits and pieces and stuff. And the lawyer said, well, actually, yes, again, some of you guys will be aware of things like the statute of limitations can be extended on date of knowledge, if there's deliberate concealment and things like that. But even that, I only found out today, actually, has got a hard long stop date of 15 years. And so if these derivatives were sold, for example, the peak of, when interest rates were 5.75 and LIBOR was like going towards 6% and stuff at the middle of 2007, we're 15 years beyond that already. In the middle of 2007. Okay, we still got a bit of 2008 left. So actually, even if still people wanted to litigate, it's extremely difficult to run a non-time barred new derivative case today. Yes, it may be possible, but it's very, very difficult to do so. So in other words, as Paul pointed out, this 14th of December deadline is effectively a free way of trying to complain to the FCA, which for the first time, like I said earlier, is willing to say they're actually willing to look at individual complaints. And the fact that the FCA is refusing to even kind of publicize this or anything, which Andy and others have been trying to push for, is another vindication why actually I think this is so important. Because if they were going to publicize it, then I'd almost think there's no value in it.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point. And we'll come back to that, Abhishek. We'll come back to that. Thank you very much. Mr. Ian Lightbody, anything to add at this stage, sir?
Yeah, just a couple of things, Andy. We mentioned James Hurley earlier. I keep in touch with James regularly. James is a great guy, but you'll have a conversation with James and he'll say, "Oh, I remember that." Go back to, and he'll go into his archives and he'll find something from 2018. It's keeping these guys, focused on these issues, which is the hard point. The other thing was, I'm going back to yesterday's. I don't know if you haven't had a chance to watch the FCA at the Treasury Select Committee yesterday. They said basically, we were doing our best at the time, and we're still trying to do our best. That's all. That's all basically they could come up with in relation to what they're doing. It was remarkable. But I agree with Stephen Barker that we need to corral all this information and present it effectively. And perhaps maybe the new Chancellor and the new Treasury Ministers are the people maybe to try and get a fresh perspective of this, because we've been basically blank for forever. And bear in mind, it was Philip Hammond on the 19th of January 2019 when the BVRS thing, this failed, miserable scam, was mooted. Bear in mind, a tribunal system, which, believe it or not, the FCA were in favour of, allegedly. The HM Treasury were hell-bent in avoiding a tribunal system. Philip Hammond wrote to the UK Finance and said, if you don't get a meaningful amount of restitution and remediation for SME businesses, it will come back to the HM Treasury. We need to get together and basically bring this back to Treasury or back to Parliament and say, right, this is field measure, this is a scam, it's a fraud, it's a disgrace. Let's just get this, put a bullet or put a bomb under the whole thing, and go back to what Abhijit was saying. Very few of us have £250,000 to take on these banks individually. And from my own focus point, Clydesdale Bank, anybody who has had £250,000 gets them to the court steps, they kick the can right up the street, but they always capitulate. So let's just keep strong and get this, back to Parliament and Treasury and make ourselves a nuisance,
Thank you very much indeed, Ian. Thank you. Shortly, folks, I'm going to be sharing with you the work that the team has done together. I'm very, very proud to be part of that. This session tonight is a testimony to the power of teamwork. It's amazing. I'll be sharing with you the work that the guys have done and girls. But first, we're going to go to Steve Middleton, who put his hand up, then to Andy Candy. Mr. Middleton, thank you.
On that point on limitation, Abhishek, I mean, it's an interesting one because I've been looking at that on a case currently, which is in Ireland, and it looks to me as if certainly the Limitation Act over there, I'm not sure you get caught by the long stop date on concealment, on deliberate concealment, but it's maybe something we should have a bit of a focus on one of the sessions, because it is very important. Obviously, you step outside.
Just one quick answer on that. So that's all right. That's what I believed up until now, and I was like, if you've got fraud and deliberate concealment, it doesn't matter. But I was told categorically by Pennington Manchester Coopers today that the 15 years applies even if there is fraud of deliberate concealment once the contract date has passed.
I'd have to look. I've been studying this Northern Ireland Act on it. I'd have to see whether, because they do have slightly different law to England, and I'd have to see, because I have to say it was a little bit vague on that. It does mention the 15-year rule, but on the deliberate concealment side, I mean, the other option obviously is if you do have the fraud or that deliberate concealment, is that you would have to flip to the criminal side of things and try and bring a criminal claim instead. But I say it may be worth, Andy, at some point having a bit of a session on that, I think.
Bring it up on Thursday. Thank you very much indeed, Steve. And Mr. Andy Candy, and then we'll move on.
No, I was just going to raise the same point, that effectively fraud unravels all, as they defined in the Supreme Court relatively recently, last year or in this last year. So in terms of when it happened, the complicit activities of all the people involved that have conspired to do this, I would suggest blows any time bar out the window.
It's criminal though, Andy. That's criminal, not civil.
Okay, well, yeah. I would suggest this is criminal.
That's a really interesting point. Thanks, Andy. Okay, what I'm going to do now, folks, is spend the next approximately 10 to 12 minutes or so explaining what we've come up with. And basically, there were two challenges. One is the challenge of trying to raise as much awareness around the 14th of December deadline. And the second challenge was to try to make it as easy as possible for people to submit a legitimate qualifying complaint. I'm going to share my screen, and I can honestly say to you, I'm truly, truly proud of the work that's been done by volunteers in TTF to achieve what it is I'm about to show you. So this is a new web page that TTF produced today. And this web page is the kind of fontable knowledge relating to what we're talking about and how to do the complaint. As you can see, the title of the web page is Complaint Email Template for IRHP Victims and Those That Want to Support Them. So it's for two audiences, the victims to put a complaint in, and for everybody else that wants to support them. And you see we've stressed the word urgent here because of the urgent deadline. The web page says, if you're looking for the web page where you can download a complaint email template to assist you with a complaint about our IRHP mis-selling by banks before the FCA's 14th of December deadline, or if you want to send an email to show your support for the victims, then you're in the right place. Now, for some people who may be completely kind of new to this topic, we've said, if you are new to the topic of fraudulent IRHP mis-selling by the banks and the misery and carnage it has caused to tens of thousands of people in the UK, watch Spank the Banker. It's a documentary about the biggest bank robbery in the history of the UK, the looting of 100,000 small businesses by their bankers. It follows the intimate stories of 6 ordinary individuals who fought back against a corrupt financial system. And then there's a link where people can watch that documentary for free. It's the full strength, full length version of Spank the Banker. And I'm very proud that Samir, who's the person responsible for producing that documentary film, is with us tonight, and we'll hear a little bit from Samir, maybe a little bit later on. The email templates are available to download, okay? So there are 2 email templates, each with their own set of instructions. Be sure to download the correct template. Decide which template is right for you. When you click download here, you'll be directed to a Word document online, which you can then click file, then download. You can then have the document on your computer to copy paste from, and then edit the wording accordingly. Make sure you follow all the instructions. So email template 1 is for victims of IRHP selling, and email template 2 is for people who aren't victims but want to get involved and want to show their support. I'm now going to click on download here where it says email template 1. And this is what you get. You get to a Google document, exactly as explained in the instructions. If you want to download it, you just go to File, and then you go to Download, and then you can download it to Word. I won't do it now, but it's a very, very 3-second process. At the beginning of the document, we've got explanations and instructions, giving hopefully crystal clear reasoning behind this. The first link, which I'm going to click on, is the link that was in the minutes of the board meeting. I think Abhishek made a brilliant point earlier. The FCA has not done very much to draw this board meeting's minutes to people's attention. If we go to 7.6, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.6, there's a bit, I won't read it all now, but there's a bit all about what we're talking about, okay? And what this basically says in plain English is you've got until December the 14th to do something about this if you want to make a complaint. We only got to know about this part of the minutes of the FCA's board meeting because a couple of brilliant journalists at Thomson Reuters, Lindsay Rogerson and Rachel Walcott, made us aware through Ned Beale at Hausfeld, the law firm. That's the law firm that's actually helping the APPG on fair business banking with its judicial review against the FCA. We got to know through a party who told somebody else who told somebody else. That's the only reason we got to know. And if it hadn't been for Ned Beale writing a short note to us about this particular point, we would not be having this meeting today because we would not have known about the whole thing. Right? So please understand, the FCA has gone out of its way, we would think, to not raise awareness of this matter. And I think the point that Abhishek made is really, really relevant. Going back to the letter, we then give step-by-step instructions about exactly what to do, even down to then put these people, these MPs' email addresses into the CC line, okay? And then put Tina Kenyon, TTF, into the CC line, and then do X, Y, Z, follow the letter's instructions. We then got the letter. We haven't got time to go into it in detail. We really, really don't need to. But all you need to understand is we've produced very, very clear narrative explaining the problem. We say, for example, We've also CC'd each of the members of the APPG on fair business banking because the FCA's appalling handling of IRHP mis-selling has resulted in the APPG seeking to get justice for the victims through a judicial review. The APPG has been battling for years for IRHP mis-selling by the banks to be treated fairly. Here's a quote from the judicial review fundraising page, and some of you were involved in helping to raise the 100 grand to do the JR. Key quote here on that webpage is this: the mis-selling of interest rate hedging products by banks to businesses is one of the UK's largest ever financial scandals. Livelihoods were lost, businesses built up over many years were destroyed, and lives were ruined. The APPG was founded in response to the scandal. We also copy in people from the Treasury Committee because we say here, basically, there is really good reason for the Treasury Committee to start making an inquiry. We say it here. As such, I believe the TSC is well placed to look into the issues raised in this complaint and should do so because they relate to a major public interest issue that has impacted thousands of business owners, and each member will have constituents who are IRHP mis-selling victims. We have a bit about the Justice Committee and why they're included. We also have a bit about the Financial Regulators Complaints Commissioner and why they're included as well. We also have the Prime Minister, because he stated, our new Prime Minister stated, this government will have integrity, professionalism and accountability. Trust is earned and I will earn yours. So we say, so I must assume he welcomes the opportunity to demonstrate his trustworthiness through the actions he takes as a result of my making him fully aware of a terrible situation that is characterized by a total lack of those three words: integrity, professionalism and accountability. I've also included Tina Kenyon because she's keeping tabs of how the campaign activity is going, etc., etc., etc. And of course, I'm including my MP. So what's going to happen is this. If you're a victim of IRHP mis-selling and you haven't yet put your complaint in, you go to the webpage, you download this letter, you fill in the bits where you need to fill it in. For example, there's a section down here where you talk about your particular case. You put your name at the bottom of it, and then you email it along with all the people that have been CC'd. It has taken weeks and weeks and weeks, and quite probably hundreds of man hours to put this together, because we realised that not only should we make the complaint, we should make the complaint on the basis of showing why the complainant is totally and utterly justified to seek compensation and redress and all the rest of it. Within this letter, you've effectively got a really strong, compelling rationale that we hope any independent party reading it would conclude that this is outrageous. You know, this is a national scandal that, 10 plus years on, these people are still battling for compensation and justice. We talk about everything that's relevant in here. We talk about BBRS, we talk about the mis-selling, we talk about SWIFT. There's some seriously good work that's gone on to this. And in all honesty, if the guys and girls who produced it charge their time out accordingly, then this thing, this document would be worth tens of thousands of pounds. It's as simple as that. We end up with this bit here. Mr. Lloyd, please now confirm receipt of this complaint, confirm that this is a complaint and that it will be treated by the FCA as a complaint, confirm that I've made this complaint prior to the December 14th deadline, provide an initial assessment as to how long it will take before you reply to my complaint in full, confirm that the persons dealing with the complaint are experienced and qualified sufficiently to deal with the issues such as margin credit and ISDA arrangements. I look forward to hearing from you without delay, and please be sure to copy in Tina Kenyon, etc. Instructions, replace this wording at the bottom and put your name in there. So in summary, all the hard work has been done. The hard work has been hard work, and what the guys have produced, particularly Paul Carley and Stephen Barker, Steve Middleton, Andy Candy, but many other people have been involved. It's just absolutely phenomenal. I'm going to go to Paul Carley in a minute because he's put his hand up. But before we do, could I please invite everybody to kind of applaud outrageously as loudly as you can to thank all the people who've been putting in their time on a purely voluntary basis with sole intention of trying to help other people get out of the horrible mess that they've been put in by these pranksters. Mr. Paul Carlier, you've got your hand up, sir.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're also trying to do with the letter is we've got to remember that there's so many victims out there who don't know they were a victim or don't know the extent to which they were a victim and all the issues that were relevant to them. So what this does, it gives everyone the chance to look at everything that's there, you know, and understand it, and hopefully understand their story and what happened to them better. Because, you know, I know, you know, going back a few years now, I was repeatedly coming up with people like, I know I was the victim of wrongdoing, but I don't know, they didn't know how to prove it or how to argue it or what the bank had actually done. And I think what this letter does, and hopefully it's something that we can use going forward. I mean, we did it with Blackmore Bond as a similar kind of thing. Yep. You basically give people the skeleton of all the issues and allow them to read it, digest it, and then do with it what they need to do. And you know, fingers crossed. And as well, getting MPs copied in is incredibly important. In Blackmore Bond, we had this draft letter that victims could send in, and what we quickly discovered is that HM Treasury had produced a briefing document for MPs to give them all this bullshit spiel that everything about Blackmore Bond was beyond the FCA perimeter authority and powers. We were then able to distribute documents and evidence to prove that was not the case, and MPs picked up on that. And then all of a sudden, the FCA's the position came back. Oh no, the FCA was less able to intervene. Yep. So in other words, confirming there was powers. And you've seen in recent weeks some certain developments on that, and there's a hell of a lot more going on behind the scenes, because, you know, what the FCA came out with some absolute corkers at that APM, and I've raised it and I've shared it, and this is the value of forcing them to commit to a position. So I think this is, you know, people hopefully can tweak this, and people that weren't aware become aware, and everyone's the better for it.
Thank you very much, Paul. We're going to hear from Samir in a minute. I know that Samir needs to jump off shortly, and I'd love to give him a chance to just get a few words in. Then we're going to go to Ian Lightbody. I'd then love to go to Ian Fraser. Ian Fraser's been an absolute hero from a journalistic point of view on this sort of stuff for years and years and years. I'd love to give Ian Fraser a chance to share whatever he'd like to share. But first of all, let's go to Samir. And remember, Samir is the guy that created Spank the Bankers and is interested in producing further work with TTF. Samir, please say hi and share your thoughts. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. And special hi to Andy and his team and all of you who worked very hard, as well as my neighbor, Ian Fraser. Ian, we are overdue to catch up, get some good whiskey on. I think, you know, when we talk about freedom of information, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, democracy, you know, I've been British for 27 years, and doesn't really matter. I mean, I'm human, and I'm interested in humanity and human subjects. But this is, you know, I'm afraid when I respect expertise tonight, but just as a filmmaker and somebody who cares about people and how do we live in this country, and very poorly, I'm afraid I will point to, you know, a statement from Roberto Saviano, who is expert in Comora, who pointed finger on mafia, and I think City of London is the biggest mafia actually in this country, who runs everything and pulls the fingers behind and chooses who's going to be government, etc. That's why it's disappointing. We had a little chat here, and Ian Fraser knows because he's up to that BBC doesn't want to touch this subject, and they stated that actually this film has wrong tone. So unfortunately, Channel 4 responded immediately. Nick Minsky, who was head of documentaries, and said they looked at the subject and they decided not to touch this subject. Remind you that government has shares, and at the moment, this government is threatening to sell that shares of Channel 4, and I think Channel 4 will not be any more independent. It'll probably belong to Rupert Murdoch or some other big corporation. So they're not independent television. So it did go on Russia Today before war in Ukraine, and I'll repeat that, and I'm not embarrassed to say that in October 2021. Film has been seen worldwide in a shorter version, and that's the best we could do. However, making documentaries and giving impact, you know, until every person on every mile in Britain comes and see this film, either on social networks or next film that we are planning to make with Transparency Task Force. And I'm hoping that Andy and his team will collaborate and basically lead the project, and as well as Ian Fraser and all of you contribute in some way, unless we explain in simple way why and how all roads lead to City of London. And this is really institution that is criminal institution, as much as we talk about problems in Qatar and not respecting human freedoms and etc. You all know, and there is evidence, and I will ask each of you to keep in touch with Andy, who will lead the project probably, and you know, contribute in various ways, including interviews that we'll be seeking for something that maybe has a good title, Mafia of City of London, but then maybe it's not good title. We can vote for that. So I promise something different, and also I'm thinking visually how to address that and give some new people's stories, and honestly, one thing that hurts me, that I've been attacked on social media, including, you know, from angry people who didn't get what they want, and some people did get compensation, like Noel Edmonds, and I just see how they put all of us in a rat race, you know, no matter what you do. I mean, and it's just shame that looks like tonight there isn't like 250 to 2,500, you know, 0.5 million British, you know, listening and talking about this, because this is what will make people homeless tomorrow, and this is what, not at the moment, majority of British people today. I was reading a bit about you know, trying to fix new tax system, you know, that will work for the bankers, and a small print from Liz Truss that bankers' bonuses will go back. That I never heard, maybe I'm wrong, that they will revise that now, you know, that they will stop the decision, and etc. So watch for next film, and again, Andy will inform you, as well as Ian Fraser, about, you know, contribution and what you can do, and hopefully we can make some remarkable stories. And as a filmmaker, I'm interested in human stories, and anything that's shocking, revealing, and in simple words that every person can understand. And to be honest, impact documentaries have their reason. Thank you.
Samir, thank you very much. I think we are very, very lucky to now be in dialogue with Samir, because there are going to be, I guess, two main success factors here. One is the strength of our argument, and the second is how much awareness we can get about the argument. There's a brilliant Saul Alinsky quote. I'm going to try and give it to you exactly right, rather than make a complete mess of it. The quotation is, by the way, if you don't know, Saul Alinsky was an American in Chicago in the 60s and early 70s, who was an amazing campaigner for justice and all the rest of it. And his quote was, no politician can sit on a hot issue if you make it hot enough. We know from the Panorama experience that really helped massively. So everything we can do to raise awareness through the media, particularly documentaries, will be really, really valuable. We're going to go to Mr. Ian Lightbody. Then if Ian's happy to speak, I'd love to give Mr. Ian Fraser a chance to share his thoughts as well. Ian Lightbody, thank you.
Thanks, Andy, again. Samir, I agree with you. I think that we are pretty much the most corrupt, relatively the most corrupt nation in the world. I say relatively because people expected, yesterday, for instance, the FCA say that they are regarded around the world as being the leaders in relation to regulation and the regulatory authorities in financial. That is just a spectacular statement, in that we are, if you take what we've discussed today, and I agree with you, there's only 25 on ours, 23 now in this call. There was 25 to start with. That is the big issue. There are thousands and tens of thousands of businesses who have been affected here. Some of them don't even know they've been affected. They've paid up their loans and they were defrauded. They don't know. And that takes me to the next point. Sorry, before I go, Ian Fraser, you're absolutely right, guys. Ian Fraser is a shining light in a very dark pond, in that, you know, his previous employers, the Herald in Scotland, or the Glasgow Herald, it used to be called, was the go-to newspaper. I think their circulation is down to 15,000 now, which is ridiculous. The fact is that they're the behest of the banks. Clydesdale Bank are one of the biggest sponsors, so they don't want to do bad news stories. You know, Clydesdale Bank, for instance, a couple of weeks ago, lodged £30 million defence costs against RGL, with the biggest banking case in British banking history. It hasn't been reported anywhere. You know, £30 million. Anyway, that. I think going back to the point somebody made earlier, if these banks are so sure of themselves, cocksure, why don't they let these cases go into the BBRS? As many people have actually, there's a lot of platitudes going about, but people, Andrew Bailey, for instance, once said, put them in. All the Clydesdale cases should go in. For instance, the Clydesdale don't want these cases anywhere near the BBRS or any of these situations, just in case somebody somewhere decides this is, or wakes up and smells of coffee, and these frauds and scams get exposed eventually. But the point was, if you have nothing to hide, why don't you put them in? And they've never answered that question. And then you get, for instance, I don't know if everybody knows in this call, the bank appointed member. So this so-called FCA are a stakeholder, the FOS are stakeholders, the APPT have been there, the SME Alliance were all there, and we get this scam of a scheme where basically the last minute they changed the Articles Association, they put in 7 bank appointed members to rule what's meant to be an independent scheme. It's mind-blowing. We need to, Sam here, we need to back you, find the means to get you out there, and we need a new documentary which absolutely gets the exposure that this matter requires.
Thank you very much, Ian. Well done. Very, very well done. Mr. Ian Fraser, a gentleman many of us have a great deal of respect for. Mr. Fraser, please introduce yourself and share what thoughts you'd like to. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ian Fraser. I'm a financial journalist and author. I've also worked on quite a lot of TV documentaries, including working with Samir on Spank the Banker, which I think was a phenomenal film. If you haven't seen it, you should. And there's a shorter version, which was made for RT. When was it? 2021, I think.
Yeah, October, yeah.
October 2021, which I can circulate the Vimeo link to if that helps. I don't have it immediately to hand, but I mean, really, I think that is a powerful film which gets across the emotional side of this. One of the problems with writing about bank fraud or frauds committed by banks is it can all be quite dry and quite technical. But I think what Samir's film does is that it brings home, the trauma and the emotional damage that banks can do when they deliberately set out to destroy small and medium-sized enterprises. So yeah, I think it's a superb film, and it probably isn't well enough known. I mean, RT
if I can say, just thanks for your contribution, Ian, and you've been amazing, because I'm just a filmmaker, and you're definitely very much brain behind this. And
George Caravan.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, let's not forget our friend George Caravan.
But so I think we need more things like that. And the BBC, they have made some quite good films about banks behaving back badly, which tend to be forgotten. I've made a list of them once, but there's been a whole series since about 2013 about various things. Andy Verity's been involved with several of those. So yeah, I know with Samir's film, the BBC refused to broadcast it, saying it had, inverted commas, the wrong tone. But that was appalling. They should, BBC Scotland even, which is their own dedicated channel in Scotland, who Samir knows well and has worked with in the past, at the very least they could have shown it. But yeah, they didn't. But
excellent.
I think the overall point is, this deadline of the 14th of December, it sounds as if it is almost like a last chance for people who have been mis-sold swaps and have not been compensated properly because of the corrupt process that was instigated, have a chance to finally help to put things right for them and for the wider community. So very positive.
Ian, thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you. Well, when we follow up, folks, we're going to be talking about the different ways we can get the word out there through word of mouth, through groups, through social media, through, for example, the Federation of Small Businesses, maybe some of the APPGs, etc., etc., etc. So today is effectively kicking off the process. It's not the beginning and the end. It's just the kick-off process. I mentioned there are 2 letters. I'm going to go back to the web page I started showing you earlier, because I want to explain the second letter template. So this is the letter template to use if you are not a victim of RHP mis-selling yourself. It's for somebody who wants to write to their MP to say, please MP, do what you can to help these poor folk because. So again, you just go to the download page, you get a very simple explanation about what to do. You send it to your MP, you copy in all of these people here, for the reasons are given why, you copy in TIDA, you put these words into the subject line, please do what you can to help the victims of interest rate hedging products by banks. You copy paste the wording in, then you send it. And here's the actual letter itself. Dear MP, the instruction is to put your MP's name in there. Dear MP, I am one of your constituents. My address is, and your address and postcode. I'm contacting you to ask that you do all you can to support the plight of the thousands of victims of interest rate hedging products by banks. I'm not an RHP victim myself, but I feel strongly that there has been a gross miscarriage of justice towards those victims, despite the malpractice, malfeasance, misconduct and mis-selling by the banks having taken place many years ago, and despite the fact that there is no dispute that mis-selling did occur, and despite the fact that there has been very serious harm caused, many victims have still not got the compensation or justice they deserve. If you're new to the topic, then watch Samir's video, watch Samir's documentary. We then explain why the different other parties are copied in, the APPG, the Justice Committee, etc., etc. And then we say, here's the basis of the complaints. And then we basically reproduce part of the complaint letter between the purple lines, so that if the MP wants to read it and understand the nature of the problem, that they can. And then it ends with, as you'd expect, it ends with basically, thanks very much and do what you can. And we suggest a few ideas. We suggest that they could, for example, think about the following. First of all, still getting to it. We say, thank you very much for taking the time to read my notes to you. Please let me know what you can do to help the victims. For example, are you aware of any RHP victims in your constituency that may not yet know about the December the 14th deadline? If so, can you write to them to let them know? It would be tragic if they missed the deadline. It really would be tragic if they missed the deadline. Can you write to the chair and CEO of the FCA asking them what they are doing about the scandal? Can you write to the chair of the Treasury Select Committee asking what they can do to help? Can you write to the Economic Secretary of the Treasury, etc., etc., etc.? So we are very deliberately trying to create a sort of contagion dynamic whereby lots of MPs end up getting these letters. They'll probably read this stuff and think, you know what, I thought this was all dealt with years ago. Didn't we do what we're supposed to do? They are probably unaware that these are still very, very live issues. And of course, we'd have all those letters going into the FCA as well. My final point before we start bringing the session to a close is that a couple of weeks ago on the Mortgage Prisoners event, we raised awareness of a particular podcast, which I'm going to share with you now. Let me share my screen. A podcast which involved an interview of John Glenn, the former city minister. So I'll put a link. I'll put a link to this. I already have put a link to this in the chat. Listen to this one, the former city minister John Glenn. Former City Minister John Glenn on the regulatory changes the UK really needs now and how he'd like to see his proposed Brexit, blah, 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 blah. Towards the very end of it, so if you want to, just listen to the last 10 minutes, he basically says that he saw his role as the city minister as being about promoting the interests of the city in Parliament. And within that one statement, we've got the whole problem encapsulated in one simple statement. A government minister who saw his job not as overseeing the governance and regulation of the City of London. These are his words. I promise you, listen to the podcast, you hear it yourself. He says, I may not exactly have it right, but the gist of it is he saw his job as promoting the interests of the city in Parliament. And if that is what the gentleman is actually willing to say in public, on a podcast, then my goodness me, what kind of conversations are being had behind the scenes? Is it possible that the reporting by James Hurley that there appeared to be some kind of collusion between the banks and the Treasury that resulted in the FCA reducing the amount of compensation to the victims? Is it conceivable, folks, that that could actually be completely and utterly true, as seems to be the case based upon the evidence that's been given? Paul Kiley's got his hand up, and then we'll go to any other business from anybody else, then we'll bring the session to a close. Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I think certain things that we would think of inconceivable. I mean, Mr. Glenn has made several false representations to me in correspondence, but this whole, I don't know if anyone's been following the Matt Connolly case, and obviously he had his conviction overturned, and I'm astonished, and I'm in the process of writing to the Treasury Select Committee over this, that Matt discovered evidence to prove that the FCA produced a witness statement for court in New York that they knew to be false. They had representations in there that they knew to be false, and they did it at the behest of the Department of Justice. And not only did they, the guy actually made actual statements that were contradicted by internal emails that Matt's legal team obtained from 5 months earlier. I mean, it's not like you're talking about stuff from 15 years ago. Oh, I forgot. The guy lied, and he was ushered out of the FCA, and he's now head of the regulator in Dubai. Of course, out of one revolving door into another. But what Matt's case also uncovered was that there was a deal done between the FCA and Deutsche Bank, and basically the original notice to Deutsche Bank in respect to LIBOR originally contained the names of multiple senior executives, including then CEO Anshu Jain, and that they were all aware of it and involved in the manipulation of LIBOR, or optimizing the manipulation of LIBOR. The FCA then, as internal documents say, we have to keep all these names out of it, and we stop it. And they just literally picked one senior manager to basically include as a scapegoat. We stop it. I think it was David Nichols, his name was. We stop at him, and we remove all mention of the others, and we just say that the senior executives were aware of potential risks. So that literally just, it's not a lie. They were potential risk, but they removed the fact that they were actively involved in it. Now, other evidence Matt's got suggests that basically the Deutsche presented an offer where they would pay a much bigger fine to the FCA in return for the FCA removing those senior execs' names out of the document. And if so, we're talking about essentially the FCA potentially accepting a bribe, and not only that, Deutsche Bank is essentially using shareholder money to bribe a regulator to keep their senior execs out of the frame, so to speak. But there's a whole lot more to come on it, and I'll post something in the chat, one of the documents that Matt got.
Well, thank you very, very, very much indeed. Transparency Task Force always works hard at being very, very evidence-based. We only make the statements we make, we only pose the questions we pose because there's sufficient evidence to do so. And I honestly think that we are uncovering a horrible, 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 ghastly, ugly can of worms here that has put the interests of some individuals in the City of London and government and the Treasury way, way, way above the interests of ordinary citizens and ordinary business owners. And this Irhp scandal, and it is a scandal, not just the scandal itself, but the scandalous way it's been treated afterwards, BBRS and all the rest of it, it is just a very good example of what is clearly a chronically sick system that is absolutely failing the public. It really is. Okay, I've put the link to the chat where you can download the letters, use your initiative, spread the word as best as you can. We're going to keep promoting it and promoting it as best as we can as well, either directly or through channels. We've got some people with their hands up. I'm going to go to John Goody. John, great to see you, by the way. I only just noticed you're here. John, please introduce yourself and share your thoughts, sir. Thank you.
Thanks. I would like to extend my grateful thanks to everyone for the contribution of that template. I think it's extremely important, and I, for one, will broadcast it on social media and certainly get a number of people who I know will want to send that complaint letter in. But let me tell you from a personal experience how very important all this action is. Firstly, I go to court on the 29th of November to fight to save my home of 30 years in the Court of Session, very quickly the highest court in Scotland. I will do so without any legal representation, apart from the legal arguments that have been presented, because my legal team wanted another £20,000 on top of what I had already paid them, and they only gave me 14 days notice. This is the sort of thing that we're up against. And when Sam here talks about people losing their homes, I'm going to lose my home very, very probably if the appeal of an American hedge fund, which is allowed to purchase debt from banks, is allowed to carry on. And as for John Glenn was given a report by the Treasury Select Committee to widen the regulatory perimeter for banking regulation in 2019. It was recommended that he do so by the Treasury Select Committee and indeed Andrew Bailey. And John Glenn threw it out. I would say to you, gentlemen, that in the next 24 months, you will have a very hard task with Sunak, Hunt and Glenn at the centre of power. Your outside chance is maybe, and only maybe, a Labour government. Thank you all for your efforts, and I will support it. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much indeed, John. Thank you. Having those words from you of all people is really quite touching. Thank you very much indeed, folks. Does anybody else want to come in with any points before we start bringing the session to a close? Okay, while I'm finding some slides, I'm going to quickly kind of summarise and test my ability to multitask. I'm pretty useless at it, so it's pretty hardly.
Can I say something?
Please do, please, yes.
Yeah, in relation to what Paul Carlier was just saying about Deutsche Bank and Matt? Sorry,
Matt Connolly, yeah.
Yeah, Matt Connolly case, which is fascinating. I think Andy Verity is very much on top of that. They're often doing this kind of thing, like when when the Financial Services Authority, which was the predecessor body to the Financial Conduct Authority, was doing its report into the collapse of RBS, they basically went to visit a guy called Victor Hong, who was managing director of risk management in RBS Greenwich Capital in the US, asked him to retract his resignation letter. And they also asked him to, what's this? Hang on, I'll check the exact phrase. Basically, they were trying to get him to retract the evidence that he had already presented about what was going wrong with RBS Greenwich Capital in the US, because it didn't suit the narrative of their report. So, you know, this is astonishing. They wanted him to retract his 8th of November 2007 resignation letter, in which he said, "My expected oversight and sign-off responsibilities for monthly price verification would be intolerable based upon persistent discrepancies between trader marks and analytical fair market values." And secondly, they wanted him to disavow all the work he had done at RBS Greenwich Capital. So these were two senior people from the FSA, Will Amos and Vanessa Smith, who doorstepped him in New York City 2011, when the report was due out a couple of days later, to try and get him to retract his evidence.
Amazing, absolutely amazing. I mean, what do you say to that? What do you say to that?
But again,
for a bribe.
Again, though, what's being done about it. Like Ian's pointing out, this is there. This is the, and yet, no one's taking anyone to task. I mean, you've got the whole hierarchy of oversight is conflicted or corrupted. It's astonishing.
This sadly takes the conversation to two words that Roger Mullin's a former Scottish Member of Parliament, a man that we are getting to really know and like a lot. He wrote a piece recently all about corruption in the system, and he used the phrase state capture. And it's a phrase I've never really thought about before, so I've been thinking about it a lot since. And state capture is the idea that you've actually got rot across the system. And I think that is what we've got. We've got parts of our system that have actually become ineffective. How many times does the FCA, the Serious Fraud Office, the City of London Police, the City of London Corporation, the FOS, all the other bits of the system that are supposed to do what they're supposed to do to make sure things are done properly, there seems to be consistent failure right across the system. And that's why, as conspiracy theorist as it might sound, it is worth looking into the topic of state capture. Roger Mullin's
it's known as regulatory. It's actually known more simply as regulatory capture, and Ian Fraser knows this very well as well. Basically, as I said to you earlier, it's from Treasury downwards. Treasury are basically shutting down every opportunity we've got, and we've got to somehow get this, blown up. All of these topics tonight, believe it or not, the FCA have fallen. This guy, I don't know who it was, this maverick director of retail banking, who wrote to my MP, but he basically, rather than just answer a simple question, he basically opened up a whole can of worms. And every subject we've talked about tonight, regulatory capture, the BBRS, the SWIFT report, the SWIFT review, the Irhp reviews, whether Clydesdale Bank's loans were Irhps or not, everything he basically threw into and it's an opportunity now I think we've got. And people like Ian keep banging the drum. We've got to take this to a higher level. I mean, Andy Verity is a great guy, lovely guy, but he's obviously LIBOR is his big thing at the moment. But Andy and his team have said, there's only so much that they can do because they've done it so many of these things before. People look at these documentaries, it can't still be going on. We're the only people who know the 18 of us left on the call now out of 25. We're the ones who know at the sharp end exactly what this has done. Can I just say to you, David Thorburn, who's the CEO of Clydesdale Bank, prior to that, he was the CEO of Clydesdale Bank. He is Fred Goodwin's best man at Fred Goodwin's wedding, and Ian Fraser put that in his book, right? Fred the Shred got his name at Clydesdale Bank when he was the CEO of Clydesdale Bank. I think it's Fred the Shred when he was at NatWest or RBS. So this little incestuous pond we've got of all these wheelers and dealers. Thorburn sat in front of Andrew Tyree and all somebody mentioned Nicky Morgan after that, who we met, and then we've had somebody else. We've had Mel Stride, who's a plant to get Kevin Holmrig out. Now we've had the Jungle Fever guy trying to get into the Treasury. This is somebody made today a point at Times Radio that the politicians in this country, and you look at Trump with 70-year-old and you look at 80-year-old American Biden. Politicians in this world are a substandard, and we are, we're basically led by these, and George Glenn's an absolute, classic. David Thorburn, who then left Clydesdale after years of billions of pounds of losses, net bottom line losses in his profit and loss. If he had applied the same rules to himself and his own bank as he applied to the rest of us, they would have been put on the personal guarantees and others, all sorts of rubbish. But Thorburn said in front of Andrew Tyree, 60% of 8,372 basic fixed rate loans had run their course. That's where his words were. And when Andrew Tyree said, what does run their course mean? He said, they're paid up. So by 2014, the 17th of June 2014, over 5,000 unsuspecting SMEs had all sorts of hidden margins and frauds and scams and break costs added into loans. Billions of pounds. One bank who's got 3.5% of the market share, 3.5%, billions of pounds of hidden commissions and margins. and he said they'd run their course. So recently, when Kevin Holmrick told the bank that they should be putting they should be writing to every fixed rate tailored business loan company or firm, SME, and they should be saying to them, put your case into or write to us and tell, or the BBRS, whatever it is. I mean, the BBRS is shambles, but they came back and said they wrote back, and the director who wrote back's now gone. They're all basically, our turnover of staff's unbelievable. But the director wrote back and said they saw that would be problematic. No shit, Sherlock. They've been paying 5% plus, 5.5% over what they've been quoted as a LIBOR-based loan. Anyway, that's it. And then you go to the FOS. The FOS say, Clydesdale are not a LIBOR-setting bank. We say we never said they were. It's a LIBOR misrepresentation, not a mis-setting of LIBOR. So the problems we've got here are just immense, but we have the solutions and we have the information and we will get there.
Thank you very much indeed.
Has anyone here heard of the financial or finance innovation lab?
Yes.
Because there's a woman called Marloes, Marloes.
Yes.
What's her surname? I forgot her
surname. Nichols.
Marloes Nichols. And I had a long chat with her the other day, and she seems to be doing some good stuff. But is she someone who you would consider joining forces with, or the
TTF is part of the Finance Transformation Network that Marloes at the Finance Innovation Lab and the guys at Positive Money have created. We're part of that constellation. We are lovely people. Marloes is wonderful.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you very much, Mr. Paul Kiley. Then I'll close with a couple of slides. Paul.
Yeah, just a quick thing. The private criminal prosecutions.
Yeah.
So, I know all these different avenues are running out, but I can't say too much but there is something in train at the minute that has basically been years in the making and has been devised one thing that we've learned over the last decade is what all the pitfalls are, what all the barriers and what all the obstacles are. So what we've got in train now has been designed to literally circumvent all of them, and the wheels are in motion. Letters have gone out, and yeah, this I think is going to prove to be the blueprint for tens of thousands of customers that have been destroyed by banks via some and/or insolvency firms. So yeah, keep the faith, watch the space, and it's if they're not going to do it, the hierarchy of oversight, you've got to do it yourself. So here's hoping.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to share my screen and share a few thoughts before we run the session to its close. So, okay, great. So some further food for thought. So Margaret Mead, very famous statement: never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Transparency Task Force is built around that idea that we may be small, we may be little, we may not have any power, but we can make a difference if we are seriously committed and we work for the change that we believe in. James Baldwin. There's so much wisdom in this comment. There really is. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And to me, folks, that speaks to the idea that we've got to face up to the reality that there is rot in the system. The system is riddled with different kinds of rot, and that is what we are really facing. And that's why we are being let down, not just by one organisation, but by many, many organisations that ought to be doing a much better job of looking after society than they are. And of course, Martin Luther King. I think about this quotation whenever things are feeling really tough, and sometimes they really do feel really, really tough. It's about keeping the faith. I think Paul and Ian just used the phrase, keeping the faith, keeping at it. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's what we're doing with you. and with each other. And on that note, we can bring tonight's session to a close. We'll follow up tomorrow with emails and you'll know exactly what to do. But can I just close by thanking in particular Paul Carlier and Stephen Barker and Steve Middleton and Andy Candy for putting a phenomenal amount of effort on a purely voluntary basis, and years and years worth of thought leadership and experience and insight into producing those templates that hopefully dozens, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of people can make really good use of before the 14th of December. Let's give ourselves a pat on the back, folks. Thank you very much. Well, I do hope you found that video useful and informative in some way. Please do remember, if you haven't already done so, become either a subscription member or make a donation. Both of the links you need are coming up on your screen now. And they're also in the video description. Thanks again. Thank you.